Well, in either 78 or 79, no, it would have been 78, totally disillusioned with left-wing politics, which is what I was involved in, and feeling totally burnt out as a social worker, I decided that it was time I went to India. I'd long wanted to go to India, but I didn't want to go during the height of the hippie days. So this seemed a good time to go, and my friend Jenny, she was also a burnt-out social worker, and she wanted to go to India, so off we went. And we were there for 3.5 months, taking a little respite now and again in Nepal and in Sri Lanka. But mainly, we just kept being drawn back into India. I didn't think I was looking for anything apart from a break, a bit of a holiday. But it soon became obvious when we arrived in India that I was interested in what all these religions were about. I'd never considered myself a religious person. My mother brought me up with actions have consequences. She would say, if you do good, you meet good. If you do bad, you meet bad. A liar you can never trust, even when they speak the truth. Those were the sort of things I was brought up on. My mother's she was more devotional Christian. But that wasn't my path. So there I was, totally disillusioned with left-wing politics. People saying one thing and doing another, including myself. And so, whilst I was in India, I just became fascinated by the people and the level of devotion and religiosity. However, the action started when I got to Sri Lanka. For some reason, a Buddhist family took us in, and they treated Jenny and I as though we were their daughters. And every day a monk visited them, a young monk. And I suppose the essence of what I want to say about this family is they were so kind. There was no difference between us and their daughters. I was impressed with that. So one day, going away from their house into town, I was in Kandy at the time, I went past the temple of what was known subsequently to me as the Temple of the Tooth. And what attracted me was they were beating these drums. It was absolutely fantastic. And, I like dancing. So I sort of jigged about on the pavement, and then I said to Jenny, hey, let's go across and see what's going on. So we went across, and it was the first temple that anyone had invited us into. They said, come in. And they didn't mind me dancing. And I said, well, what's going on? They said, oh, celebration, Buddha's birthday, and this is the Temple of the Tooth, and we're circumambulating his tooth. Well, I don't know whether I believed it or not, but it was good enough for me that the fact that there was music which was danceable to, and nobody seemed offended. So I decided, got to find out what this Buddhism is about. So went back to Colombo, tried to find out where Vihara was, found one, saw the monk, told him what we were up to. He gave us what subsequently became known as the Eightfold Path. It was completely green, anything about Buddhism. And read them, Jenny and I, every evening. And on the 9th evening, we went back to see this guy with lots of questions. And he didn't want to see us, but it was good enough that he'd given us these 8 pamphlets. He didn't seem to know how to teach us to meditation, and throughout to learn to meditate, he didn't seem to know anything about meditation. However, he'd started us off onto something. So in early January, when I returned to England, I lived in North London at the time, I decided, I've just got to get on the case straight away. So I remembered that someone had told me, a guy was trying to split up with me actually, he'd had enough of me, told me that it was time I learned to meditate, and he'd heard about this place called the London Buddhist Centre. And then I remembered that I'd met a woman, an ex-girlfriend of his, who meditated, and she seemed pretty calm. And I wasn't a calm person. I probably am not now, but maybe I'm a bit aware of when I'm not calm. And I went down there, and 2 guys met me, and they were both wearing these things around their necks. One turned out to be Deva Mitra, who's now my Kalyana Mitra, and the other was Kula Mitra. He'd just been ordained. I went with a friend, and she said, it's a cult. I said, why? She said, they're too friendly. Well, I said, they're not. I was so relieved to find a friendly place after India, So she didn't go back the next week. But when I was leaving, David Mitchell said, well, see you next week then. I said, oh, definitely. I had decided when I left home at the age of 19, seeking anonymity from Birmingham, where everybody knew everybody in the black community. that my colour would never define how I led my life, yeah, even though it was probably the most obvious thing about me, and that I would just make my way in the world, not defined in that way. So going to the movement and feeling at ease there immediately didn't surprise me. I also didn't expect to meet any other black people, which I didn't for a very long time. But that was cool too, because that had been my life to date. You know, I'd always trailblazed or, you know, been a role model for other black women in particular. And whether Dave Mitra had said, see you next week or not, I was going to go back because it just felt like the right place. I remember saying to him, maybe not that evening, but maybe a bit later on, you know, when did you get this? I thought he was enlightened. I mean, I didn't know anything about enlightenment. And I remember he'd said, whatever years he told me, whether it was 4 or 8 years, I thought, I'll do it in half the time. Because I was an athlete. I was trained as an athlete, so I just thought he just applied the same principles, which is why I wrecked myself after a while. However, at some point in time, not too long after I arrived, I went to see Bhante. Because that's what I heard them saying. You know, Bhante said this and Bhante said that. I better go and see who this Bhante is. And I met Bhante, and I loved him from the very first moment. I sat down on the floor next to him, and I just felt totally unbounded. I could really just be all my many selves. And there was plenty of them then, and there's still more now. And I just felt opened up and totally uninhibited. And then I left, and I just felt so elevated and happy. So I thought, crikey, what is going on here? Anyway, I continued. I took to meditation like Dr. Water. I loved it, and I still do. I was so grateful to be given this present, this tool. I just loved it. And so I continued meditating. The next time I met Bhante, the opposite thing happened. And I said to him, Bhante, I just feel really tight. You know, I just, it's not like when I first met you when I met you the first time. He said, mm-hmm. And at some point he said, well, I think I know why it might be. But I forgot to ask him why, and he didn't tell me why. Anyway, he was still living at Padmaloka, and he used to do study for the women. I can't remember what the study was about, but I remember the next time I saw him falling asleep in the study. And it was, you know, it was really strange that I'd come out of the study and I'd be as bright and breezy as ever. So, dear, oh dear, what the hell was going on? Anyway, that phase passed, and I used to go and see him quite regularly. After that, every time I've seen him then and since, I always come away, invariably come away, feeling just bigger than I really am, and totally seen and loved. So I usually say, you know, I'm not going to go until you tell me to go, because I just love being here with you. I could just say what I wanted to say, in a way that I could have said it to the only other person, my grandmother, who was quite eccentric, and I don't know whether Bhante's eccentric or not, but something opened up in me, and I just felt that I could just be the many selves. So that's how it's been, and I just love him. He's never said that I've had to agree with everything he's written or said or done, and that's cool by me. But he's just been an invaluable person in my life, and he's just given me so much. I feel enormously grateful to him, and I just when he asked me to give a talk one time, I said, Bhante, but can't I just do your shoes? He said, no, that would be too easy. You know, well, I just don't know what to say about him. I just love him to bits. However, there was a point where I got a shock. I burnt myself out as a social worker, and probably going about life in the wrong way in terms of meditating. I was kind of one of these full-on characters who never moved into a community by this time, or worked in a business. I figured there were enough black women serving behind counters, and I might be an FWBO counter, but you know, the fact is that was not where I was going to be, because I was a genuine role model. I was not, it wasn't, my life was not ordinary in the sense of models, yes? And my work was very important to me. It was social work. I did work in the High Court. I did stuff that I loved. I loved it, but it was hard work. And I was trying to make sure I meditated and, well, just meditated. I had a good sound practice, yeah. And of course, David Mitchell continued to be the main order member in my life until, of course, Marlene and I got it together. She's now my other KM. As different as chalk and cheese. So where am I going with this? Yeah, so I went down to New Zealand, a total wreck, and I went to see Bhante before he went, and he said, look after yourself. He said, I want you to take a message to the order members down there. Oh yes, Bhante, what do you want me to say? Tell them that Bhante does not approve. I said, oh yeah. He said, yes. Bhante does not approve of them going to see some medium or other. I'd got myself lined up to go, and that people should, and that they should turn to their yidams and ask any questions they need to ask. I said, well, okay then, Bhante, I'll tell them, and I did. Some stopped going immediately. I cancelled my appointment immediately, which was a bit foolish because I'm interested in that sort of thing. But some people just continued on, because their life is their own to lead, and they probably heard what Bhante said, but figured it was, what they wanted to do at the time. So foolishly, I cancelled mine. So I didn't find out very much. Anyway, the main thing was 5.
That's about
10. Can I just say one more bit?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. I came back to England. I thought I'd go there for 3 months, stayed 14 months because of a complete wreck. Anyway, I came back and I was homeless. My brother had just gone on dialysis, and it was a very difficult time. It was a cold spring, and I was sitting in the park. I was feeling very sad. I was used to go and sit in the park near the centre a lot, and somebody told me that Bhante had said he'd seen me sitting in the park, and I looked very unhappy. And I took that as a cue to go and see him. And I asked to see him, and I saw him. And I went in. I was quite sobered, actually, by how I was and what had happened after feeling so good living in Australia and New Zealand. And I felt like a waste of space. Sangha David asked me if I'd come and be her secretary and friend in Birmingham. And it was just round the corner from where I grew up. And it didn't feel right. I didn't feel I had much to offer, actually. I was a real low ebb. I think I had a lot of assimilation to do. But I was also terribly unhappy because I was homeless. And that is one of my great fears. If anybody's read When Will I See You Again, they'll know that. So in this meeting, I told Bhante how I was. I didn't say very much. But I think he picked up the fact that I felt I was useless. The first thing he said was, well, the women haven't even found a place in Birmingham yet, so there's nothing to worry about there. And then we talked a bit, and then he said, and he's never been like this with me. He gave me the first bit of advice, and I don't know if there'll ever be another bit. He said, Muditasri, get yourself into a community, keep your head down, and dwell in the mandala of aesthetic appreciation. And I said, but Bhante, getting ready to argue, he said, but nothing. It was really Vajric. I was shocked. And it was clear there was nothing more to be said on that topic. So fairly soon after, I slunk out. And as I walked back to the place where I was staying, I think even Bhante thinks I'm a waste of space. I was really, really down. Anyway, by the time I got back to the place I was staying, I thought, well, actually, that's what I think about me. Bhante's always seen the best in me, always encouraged me, and I know he loves me. So I thought, I did exactly as he said. It took a while to find somewhere to live. And I didn't go and see him for about 18 months. Things did improve. In fact, things got better. And when I saw him next, it was I was emceeing the opening of the communities, because we'd bought 2 of the houses in Approach Road. And that was the first time I'd seen him. And whilst we were waiting I was sitting with him in a room, and I was waiting to go to introduce him, and he was going to plant a magnolia in our garden. He said, well, what are you up to these days, Muditasri? I've not seen anything of you. He wouldn't say Muditasri, he'd say Muditasri. Because that's the name he gave me, and he pronounces it beautifully. And I said, well, Bhante, I got all my old self came back with him. I said, well, Bhante, you were right, I did exactly as you said, because I couldn't think of anything else to do. And I did think you thought I was a waste of space initially. He kind of listened. And you asked me what I'm doing. I'm writing. I'd forgotten that even as a child I'd wanted to write. And he said, good. He said, one doesn't have to be a great writer. All one has to be is someone who has something to say.